Now, with just under 3 weeks to go until the EU referendum, we're asking you to send in your questions on the issues important to you by using the hashtag BBC Ask This. Joining us today to answer some of those questions is the UKIP's Migration and Financial Affairs spokesman, Steven Woolfe, who's campaigning for the UK to leave the EU. And a very good afternoon to you. Thanks for taking the time to join us for today's BBC Ask This. Lots of questions to get through. Let's begin with Paul Reid from Benfleet, who's texted, how can anyone say there's no commercial risk in leaving the EU when they don't know the implications for the value of the pound, import duty and VAT until we've completed successful negotiations? So I suppose we can categorise that question under the heading, the unknown, the uncertain.
Well, I think what is certain is that we will remain a member of the market in Europe. We still will be able to sell our goods and German products will still be able to be sold here. The question is whether we will be part of what they regard as the single market. And the single market is the tariff-free area, and that's an area that exists across Europe. It includes non-EU countries such as Turkey and also of Iceland. And the only two countries outside of that are Belarus and Russia. And we believe that the risks are reduced because Europe would be mad to exclude Britain from that and include us in the same group as Belarus or Russia and not include us in the group such as Turkey and Iceland. And therefore, if we're trading in a tariff-free zone, that means that the risks that the government and everybody else has suggested are actually very minimal.
Would you say, though, would you agree that there may well be an initial impact, negative impact on the pound, for example, in the event of an exit?
Well, that's an interesting thing. You see, the pound has actually been falling for the past 6 or 7 years. And even if you look at the last kind of graphs, the market graphs, you can see just over the last 2.5 years, it's fallen by about a third. And the main reason that international markets are getting frightened of the pound is because of the huge debt that George Osborne is building. International investors are pulling money out of our bonds in terms of 10% over the last 2 years, and that's helping force the pound down. Nothing to do with Brexit at all.
Graham from London asks, if we leave the EU but still need to access the single market, will we still have to accept EU rules allowing EU citizens freedom of movement within Britain?
No, that's a misguided interpretation of the rules by those such as David Cameron and George Osborne. In terms of the single market, yes, we would have to comply with the rules in relation to selling of products and product manufacturing and issues such as that, as the same way we would do as the United States and other countries. And that's a clear fact, and no one's hiding from that. But in terms of freedom of movement, whenever we want to have any negotiations over the next 2-year period under what's called Article 50, we could say, well, we want to have these market entrants without actually having freedom of movement. The decisions by Switzerland or Norway to include freedom of movement was part of their negotiations. We would not necessarily have to do the same, and that's why it's called the British option, not any other option.
Nick from Derby, a rather philosophical question, says, should we ask the opposite question instead? If we weren't in the EU, would we want to join? That's an interesting way of looking at it.
Well, I think you'd ask ourselves, would we want to leave our fishing industry and see it decimated? We want to see increasing costs of energy prices because of EU directives which impact our steel and other industries. Would we want to have an organisation that actually has most of the rules, 64% now according to the statistics from the government's own office and Parliament, that says that most of those rules are done by civil servants made in the European Union through the Commission? And I think, would you want to be part of an organisation which is growing with its own flag, its own court, its own parliament, its own civil service, and now its own army that they're asking for? I think most people would say no.
Jackie Tran tweets, if Britain opts for Brexit, where do you think Britain should spend the £18 billion? This refers to the sum suggested by the Brexit campaign that Britain would save by leaving the EU. The IFS, just to provide a counterpoint to that, suggests that a vote to leave would cost between £20 billion and £40 billion a year, but Brexit, in any case, saying it would save £18 billion. So where do you think Britain should spend that?
Well, I know as a UKIP politician I would like to see more spent on the NHS and in terms particularly mental health illnesses and in relation to those that have been depleted there. And I'd also like to see a greater degree of money being to reduce our national debt and help restructure our economy for a very positive future. But of course I'm not in government. That will be left to the Conservative Party, how they spend it, and more importantly, it will be left to you as the people to push politicians through our national government to try re-emphasise policies that you want, because they can't hide away from it anymore. They can't say, we won't implement these policies because we're in the EU, because they're not. And it's their choice, and you can then force them. That's the beauty of democracy.
JP tweets, isn't it a lie to say, A, we need to leave the EU to exempt the NHS from TTIP, that's a transatlantic trade and investment partnership, and isn't it a lie, B, to say we'd get extra NHS cash on Brexit?
Well, there are 2 points to that. Your writer is absolutely correct to say that there will be an option for governments to veto TTIP. And what we're asking the people of this country is to recognise that there is a danger that privatisation of parts of the NHS could fall into the hands of very large American corporations who could change policy, and that could only stop if there is a British veto. But the most secure way of securing NHS is by ensuring that we leave, and that particular agreement with those particular clauses don't go ahead. And secondly, again, it goes back to the question that was just asked a moment ago. The policy decisions of government of how we spend the benefit of leaving the EU, an extra 10 billion a year, next year it's going to be around 12 billion, will be a decision for government. Governments like ours would like to spend more on the NHS, but it falls in the hands of people like those who wrote the question to push those parties to do exactly that.
Dan in Kent texts, is it true anyone born in the EU can work, claim in-work benefits, child benefit and social housing from day one of arrival in the UK?
Sorry, I'm missing that. Are they saying that anyone born in the EU are able to claim?
Yes, that is a question. Is it true anyone born in the EU can work, claim in-work benefits, child benefit and social housing from day one of arrival in the UK? This is certainly something that David Cameron's been working on to try to reframe what benefits EU migrants to the UK can receive.
It's absolutely true that as part of the EU's freedom of movement, people from EU countries can come to the United Kingdom. They can certainly work, and of course there will be those that pay their taxes. But if they earn the same sort of levels of income that those who are able to claim benefits, they too can make the applications and claim those benefits too. And I'm fully aware of those from EU citizens who claim housing benefit, do claim child benefit, do claim in-work benefits, and that is one of the systems of having this open market where everybody from all of the EU can go to whichever country, work and claim those benefits. Now, it's a choice for yourself of whether you feel that is correct or not. We believe that, for example, in relation to child benefits, that if you're here working in this country and your children are abroad in your home country, you shouldn't be able to claim those benefits. But you can't stop that whilst we're in the EU, and David Cameron has failed to protect that fundamentally, completely, with his negotiations. And he never really tried, we believe, fully to do exactly that.
And of course, the Prime Minister saying that he would introduce changes to all of that. But let's move on to this anonymous text. So David Cameron has said the UK can control the amount of people if we stay in the EU. Well, why hasn't he reformed the EU with a point-based system? I'm presuming that that question refers to the sort of Australian points-based system for controlling the numbers of people entering the country.
Well, the problem with our current immigration policy is it's discriminatory. It does actually say that those from the EU can come freely into the United Kingdom, but those from outside of the EU have to go through our existing visa requirements. And David Cameron knows fully well that in order to have an immigration system that treats everybody exactly the same, is ethical, outwardly looking, and looks at everybody fairly, he needs to implement exactly the same visa system. And he can't do that whilst he's a member of the European Union. And nor can he introduce a points-based system that distinguishes those people from the European Union from coming in, because they have a complete right of freedom of movement as a member of the European Union. So if you want to have an ethical, clean immigration system that treats everybody in the world equally, a visa system that says I don't care whether they're a German doctor or an Indian doctor, as long as we need doctors with the skills and languages, then the only way to do that is pulling out of the European Union and demanding the government introduces a fair Australian-style points-based system that does exactly that.
OK, Steven Woolfe from UKIP, thank you very much for your time today, answering those questions from our viewers. And thank you to all of you who sent questions in to us as well.